Somebody sent me a video the other day of somebody having a go at me and various other people, in which they were saying effectively that people like me are spouting a whole load of nonsense to do with common law or natural law and anything that was deviated from what we would call the legal system, and that people were getting into a bit of trouble because they were pushing back against certain things. And it is very easy to get into trouble because a little bit of information can be dangerous. You can grab a little bit and then think, oh, I've got enough to deal with some legal things, only to find that actually probably they're ignorant on a lot of wider issues. And some of this still things that people don't seem to be able to grasp or quite understand is this business about the name. And I thought I would just try to do my best to make this a bit clearer for people, because we've had this psyop, if you like, we've had this propaganda, we've had this brainwashing on us for so long, most of our lives, and it is very difficult to understand what the name business really is. So let's just go back in time for a moment to simpler times, when perhaps the villages and small hamlets were the key places that most people lived, or they lived on the land and they were labourers. Back in those days when the villages were supporting perhaps the squire or the local landowner, you know, you might have, I don't know, somebody who was a carpenter, let's call him John for the sake of argument, and he would be known as John the carpenter because that's what he did. Oh, look, there's John. Now that John part of the name would have been the name that the mother and father gave to their little boy at the time. We've got to call him something, so we're going to call him John. Now we all understand that. But a name, of course, can change, can it not? I mean, sometimes people call me Richard, sometimes they call me Vobesy or just Mr. Vobes and things like that. So a name is just a label, isn't it? It changes all the time depending on who you're with. You may have a pet name you have for your partner, but that's not the name that you would say and sign on a bank certificate or your checkbook or an official document like that. You wouldn't sign off with yours Bubbles or whatever your pet name is for your loved one. So going back to John the carpenter, the carpenter part was his occupation, clearly. There may have been another carpenter in the village who did similar things, but he may not have been called John because there already was a carpenter who was known. Perhaps this chap, the other one, may have been called Bob or Robert or Brian or Tony or a different name. He may have been called John. They may have said, well, we like the name John so much, we're going to call him John and he's a carpenter. So then they may have said, well, actually, this John, the second John the carpenter, let's just call him from the place that we are in. Let's say it was Chichester for the sake of argument. So it was John of Chichester. So people could be labelled so that they can be identified easily of which John the carpenter that you're talking about could be very easily labelled. So in the old days, it was very simple. You didn't need to write it down. You didn't need to have it on a certificate. It was just known by everybody. People would go, oh yeah, John, or they may say John the carpenter. Well, which one? Is he from the West End? Is he from the Roman walls? Is he from near Gate Street or something like that? Yes, John the carpenter of Gate Street. Or John the carpenter, he may have been bald, John the bald carpenter, or not John the fat carpenter. You know, so there were different ways of labelling somebody or identifying to whom you're referring to. You didn't need any other system. It was very easy because men and women of course would be treated exactly the same. Mary perhaps might be John the carpenter's wife, and so she might be called, well, that's Mary, John Carpenter, so that they could identify to whom they're talking about, which Mary. It just so happens that Mary, that John the bald carpenter by Gate Street, also has a wife called Mary, and so you would find different nuances on how to label which one. She may have been tall and slim, that, you know, Mary with the 6 children, or Mary with the twins, whatever it is of John Carpenter. So these names were very easy and we could identify them. But the thing about these names, however you identified them, they were just features of the person, of that man or woman. They weren't the man or woman. As I say, the names could change very easily. Some people might have called Mary Tawley. All right, Tawley. Some of them may have called John the rotund carpenter. Hey, Fatty, come on, how's my cabinet doing? The names would change, and because the names could change, they aren't actually the individual. They're not the man. It's just a label. It's not the man. The man, of course, is some form of consciousness in a blood bound body with skin and bone, as we know. And that's why we hear the term a living man, because they are living. The name in and of itself, it's just a word, isn't it? It's just a label. It's just a sound that grabs somebody's attention. But then in recent times, all of that changed because they brought out the birth certificate. In the past, it was just common knowledge. It was listed in the parish records of who was born and who was baptised and who was married and who died, and all those sort of bits of information were just listed. Now there's a certificate. And now when I think of a certificate, I think, oh, I got a certificate because I won the egg and spoon race. You know, it's like a merit of achievement, a certificate. But this birth certificate, I mean, well done, you managed to get born, isn't that clever of you? Oh yeah, you didn't die in the process, you survived. Now you've got to look forward to a life full of all sorts of illusions and strange things going on, but never mind that, you get this certificate. And of course you don't get the original certificate, you only get a copy of the certificate. But it's this certificate that is the thing that really starts to change who you are or who you think you are. Because this birth certificate, incidentally, it does say on the birth certificate, this cannot be used to identify you, because clearly it's a certificate. It's just a piece of paper with words on it. How that's supposed to identify anybody, I do not know. Back in the old days when you could say, yes, he's a big, fat, hairy carpenter and he lives over there and there's his wife and that is him, that's how you would identify somebody. And also the villagers would know him. Oh yeah, no, that's definitely John. I'm not making it up. Look, ask Bob. And people could be identified by effectively by witnesses, by people who knew people, not by bits of paper, not by photographs, not by some digital technology. That doesn't really identify anything, but it does identify a legal fiction. And this is where the birth certificate comes in. So John the carpenter, or John of Chichester, who happens to be a carpenter, or whatever their profession is now taken that the Chichester bit or the carpenter bit becomes a surname. And so it becomes 2 names, John Carpenter, John Chichester, whatever. And so the birth certificate is registering these 2 names, the forename or the Christian name, and then the surname. And when it starts to be used and given to you, it's all being written in capital letters, the all caps name. And this is then deemed to be us. And people believe that capitalization of the name is us. But it is what the parents, or the mother and father, I should say, have told the registrar that that's their surname, Carpenter, and my little baby is called John. and it is now the Crown's property, because they've informed effectively the Crown Corporation, which is a business, that this child has been born, and they've taken the name and they've copyrighted the name, and it's now the Crown copyright property. The name, the capitalization of this individual. But it isn't the individual, it isn't the man, it isn't the living and breathing baby. He's just a baby. He doesn't know what his name is. You repeat it many times and say, your name's John, your name's John. And eventually this sound, John, which is just an utterance, is picked up by the baby, that when they hear this noise, this audio in the ears, it's like, oh, that's to get my attention. But it isn't him, it's just the label, so that other people can say, oh, what a lovely baby. What's his name? It's John. That's what's his name, a name belonging to him. It isn't him. The capitalization of this name is now in a legal system. Now, that is separate, obviously, and we've seen how that is a separate entity. It has been created as a corporation now. It is a separate entity from this baby that grows up to be a young man, and then eventually a man in his own right, who answers to that name. But in this strange world, because we are sent to school, and the school will call you out by your surname during the registration, we start to understand this false truth that the name John Carpenter is him intrinsically, that to his very soul he is this John Carpenter. And when he gets old enough to have a bank account or a passport, or to pay utility bills, or to have a mortgage, or any of those sort of things, perhaps a mobile phone contract, his name comes back to him in these capital letters, same as on a tombstone. When you die, this capital letters on the tombstone. And the John, whose name this is, thinks that it is him. But these are two completely different things. One is a real living man who is called by his friends and associates John, which is just the label. And then there's this legal entity which has been stapled to him, that he believes is him, but it isn't. It is a legal fiction run by a corporation, by the Crown Corporation, and he has embraced it, which is why when we get letters to the name in capital letters, most of us believe it is talking to us. But it isn't talking to us. It's talking to a legal fiction, a dead entity. So what is a corporation? A corporation is just a concept. It's an idea, isn't it? It doesn't live. You need people to run a corporation. If everybody in the world died suddenly, if they all just snuffed it, and there were bodies lying all over the place, just like that, corporations could not operate. They might operate for a bit because AI might be doing some sort of stuff. The computers might be shuffling bits of information, but not very much would really happen. And eventually the AI would die out at this stage where we are today, because without people, men and women, actually doing the things, making the decisions in the higher tiers of these corporations, in the hierarchy, the corporations could not do anything. So you still need people, living men and women, to operate the corporations. They're just concepts, they're just bits of words on paper. It's meaningless. And that is the same with the capitalization of the name on the birth certificate, on your bank account, on your passport, on the utility bills. It is just a fiction. It is just a concept. It doesn't exist really. It's just words. The only way any of these things happen is if real men and women, living men who have blood and guts and skin and eyes, and they breathe, do the things for this capitalized name, because on its own it is helpless, which is why the Crown Corporation and this whole scam of making us believe that we are this name in capitalization, that is us intrinsically, that is why they need us to believe this. But, you know, you get a speeding ticket, or you get a council tax, or you get a parking fine, or you get a summons for something. It never comes to you, John the carpenter, or Mary, the wife of the carpenter, or anything. It comes to this capitalized name. But it's not you. It's not you. How can it be? It's just a word. It's just this legal entity. The way I like to think of it, it's very easy for me to sort of separate myself from this so-called legal entity and myself, because I used to be an entertainer. And as an entertainer, I often had agents that would get me work. And sometimes I would be known as the Great Ricardo. It was just a name. I used to juggle and unicycle and fire eat and all those sort of things. And an agent would ring me up and say, oh, hello, I'm the so-and-so agent. Oh, yeah, theatrical agent. We've got a job. Is that the Great Ricardo? And they would ask me if now, I knew that wasn't me, because my name is Richard and I live where I live in my town, and I'm not this capitalized name, but the name they were calling me was the Great Ricardo. So I was sort of representing the Great Ricardo, because it was a complete made-up thing, just like the capitalized name that you have on your birth certificate, completely made up. It doesn't exist. But I would say, yes, I am the Great Ricardo. And the agent would say, great, okay, well, we've got this booking. Can you turn up at this place and do this thing and whatever it was? Juggling, unicycling, fire eating, whatever, a bit of mime, who knows? And I would agree to do it. Now, in a way, we are the agents of this capitalized name. We act for them. We will book them and we will pay their bills. But we don't necessarily have to pay their bills, because these things can't do it themselves. They've got no arms and legs. They can't breathe. They can't stand up. They can't hop, skip and jump. They can't do anything unless we operate them. So when a bill, for example, comes to this capitalization thing, and we look at it and we go, oh, it says you must pay this amount of money, or we'll send the boys round, all this kind of intimidation that they do, we immediately go, ah, that's me. But if they want me to pay something, why don't they write to me, Richard the juggler, the Great Ricardo, Richard the mime artist, Richard, you know, that sort of thing. Not this capitalization of a birth certificate, which in and of itself says you can't use this for identity, although everybody seems to say, oh, can you bring in your birth certificate so we know who you are? All this sort of nonsense. So we are separate from the name. Now, as I said at the beginning, a little information can be dangerous. So just knowing that you are not the name is not enough to fight the system, but it's a start. It starts us off to realize that, well, who are we? Yesterday in my video, I said, be yourself, express yourself, be you. Be somebody that is individual. Don't conform to the way they want you to conform. Don't be just like everybody else. We're all individual. We're all unique. We can be our own person. We can be our own man or woman. And make sure, as you do that, that you realize that this capitalization name on the birth certificate, on your passport, on your bank balance, on the bills that come in, is not you. You're separated from that. You're what? Consciousness. You're aware of the world. You're aware of this flesh and blood body. You're a man or a woman. You're not an entity written on paper. That cannot possibly be you. You are a unique being. That's really the start of pushing back against these corporations which are trying to take over everything. But be careful, because a little knowledge can be dangerous, and you need then to research more so that you can stand and say, no, I don't consent to your world, because the world of acts and statutes only apply to these dead entities and not to you as a living man or woman.